Hello, I'm Locke Meredith. I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where I'm again very pleased to have on the show our United States Congressman Bill Cassidy. Bill's going to talk to us about the fact that 2012 has come and gone. We've had our federal elections and we've had the same president, President Obama, our same Democratic-controlled Senate, and our same Republican-controlled House. And he's going to talk about whether or not that's going to result in any change or whether we're going to continue to have stalemate. But he's also going to give us hope. He has great hope in the American people, and so do I. So join us on the next Legal Lines with our United States Congressman Bill Cassidy. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Sean Fagan, and Corey Ogeron, and our entire staff for letting us come into your homes for the last 10 years via Legal Lines. We hope that you've come to a greater understanding of how the law works and how the government works for you. So from all of us, thank you. Welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and I'm again very pleased to have on the show today our United States Congressman Bill Cassidy. He's a congressman for District 6. Bill, it's great to see you again.
Hey, Locke, thank you.
Thanks for coming on back in. Let's just dive into it. You know, just a week ago, President Obama gave his State of the Union. It's his first State of the Union for his second term. Tell me about it. You're sitting in Congress.
Yeah. When he was inaugurated, he gave a speech which really did not touch economic issues. Turns out we still have 7.8% unemployment. There's still a lot of people who've lost a lot of wealth over the last 4 or 5 years. So I think he felt obligated to finally speak to the economics of our country's problems. And he did. Now, some of it was just almost you had to start laughing, Locke.
What's that?
Well, when he said, for example, that he's been cutting red tape on oil and gas development, and we in Louisiana, having lived through
serious oil and gas.
Yeah. And we see that on the Outer Continental Shelf, he has tied up drilling and red tape. And a lot of families have suffered because they didn't have the income from working offshore, or the income that they would have had. There were some things like that that frankly just weren't true. On the other hand, he gives a good speech. It was well received, and hopefully he will begin to focus upon the economy.
So what is your analysis of the State of the Union?
Yeah, we continue to have unemployment that bumps up to 8%, and people who are working harder but receiving less money with fewer benefits, paying more for gasoline, paying more for health insurance, paying more in taxes. We need to do a better job for that middle-class family, not through some government program, but allowing them to have access to the kind of jobs that they could if government would get out of the way.
I know one of the propositions that he gave in his speech was raising the minimum wage from, I think, $7.25 to $9 an hour. What's your analysis of that?
Well, there's the rationale for doing it is to decrease poverty. As it turns out,
which everybody wants.
Everybody wants. As it turns out, if somebody graduates from high school, does not get pregnant until she's married, and then stays married, that couple has only a 5% chance of living in poverty. Family issues have a much greater impact upon whether someone is destined for poverty than the minimum wage. On the other hand, you know, Washington, D.C. has about 20% unemployment among black youths, and small businesses cannot afford the current minimum wage in order to hire these young folks for summer jobs. If you will, raising the minimum wage works against employing those folks who've had the hardest time finding jobs. So I think it's actually the wrong medicine. It sounds good, but if you look at what decreases poverty, it's giving people job training, not raising the wage so that a small business can't afford to hire them.
You know, one other thing, and I don't know if this is necessarily accurate, but I had heard that also a lot of contracts that are negotiated by unions and such are based on minimum wage designation. You know, they're multiples of the minimum wage, and that maybe that might be potentially a driver. What is your understanding? Do we now have a minimum wage mandated as $9 an hour?
No, that has to take action by Congress. I don't think that will happen. I do think there needs to be an understanding created, again, that if you want to end poverty, we know what will end poverty. Strengthen the family, allow that family structure to just operate so that people live in a way that's healthier for them and for society. And in the meantime, if you raise the minimum wage too much, you deny employment opportunities to teenagers, which puts them on the wrong path.
It's interesting. I remember my first job, I worked for $3 an hour, and I worked all weekend long. I didn't know how to do anything, but it was my first chance to just kind of get my feet wet and start learning skills, whether it was relating to my boss or learning how to follow instructions, directions, operate equipment, all that stuff. And what I'm very concerned is if that was implemented, that it would eliminate kind of the beginner steps that we all have to go through to learn how to improve our economic situation. All right, well, let's shift from that a little bit, because Obamacare is now the law of the land.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about it a bunch of times, and the country has spoken. And let's talk about the effect of that. First, politically. Let's talk about the fact that the election has maintained, in essence, the status quo. Tell the folks what that means.
Well, obviously, we have a president, a Senate, and a House of Representatives. The Senate remains controlled by Senate Democrats, and the president himself is a Democrat. And both of these are pretty liberal institutions, if you will. Not just party, but it's also these two are liberal. And the House of Representatives is Republican and conservative. So divided not just by party, but also by a fundamental sense of how big government should be and how high taxes should be.
Philosophy.
Yes, yeah.
It's interesting. And so being, I guess, that wide a chasm between the two parties, and the fact that power is in Washington chopped up between Congress, the president, and the judiciary, but in this case, Congress is, you know, the House, the Senate, the president. Are we going to continue to have just stalemate where nothing gets done until the next election, or do you think there's room for compromise on certain areas or issues?
Some things have to get done. We obviously need to have a budget to fund our country. The Senate has not passed a budget for 4 years.
It's amazing.
But finally, we as House Republicans have basically said, we sent a bill over saying that your pay will be cut. You won't get paid until you pass a budget. Explain
to the folks, and it's so fascinating, but when it's all said and done, the House has the control of the purse strings of the United States.
No, it only has the ability to begin the opening of the purse strings. Now, the president has to sign it into law, and the Senate has to agree to it for it to go to the president. So either of these can interrupt, but all spending bills and taxing bills begin in the House. On the other hand, the House has passed a budget for the last couple of years. The Senate has not passed a budget in 4 or 5. I point out the iPad was not yet invented the last time the Senate passed a budget. That's not a way to run a household. It's not a way to run a country. You have to establish priorities, and once you've seen those priorities, you see how much money you receive, and you fund your priorities. The Senate's not been doing that.
So, Bill, are they going to respond in an affirmative way and go ahead and finally do a budget now?
I think they're finally so embarrassed. When the House passed the law that you don't get paid unless you pass a budget, it so embarrassed the Senate that now they're talking about passing a budget. That's a good thing. If you can bring, now once you have a budget, then you can come together and decide what your priorities are. I'd rather be optimistic than not, and I'd like to think it's the start of something that will be good.
So in your opinion, there really is no room for discernment of where there is common ground until the Senate and the president put forth a budget?
You know, because Locke, it is so easy to say that you're for everything as long as you don't have to pay for it. So unless you have to establish priorities, you don't really know what someone really cares about and whether that matches up to how much money you have coming in. So we will know if we have common ground when the Senate, when the president actually lay out, these are our priorities, this is how much we want to spend.
And so you're hopeful that both are going to do that, and then that will lead to the I guess, the getting together and hopefully working out on certain issues.
I'm smiling because for 4 years they haven't done it.
And that's why I'm asking, because based on history to date, that hasn't happened. And so I'm wondering, are you getting any kind of signals that really may happen?
The Senate says that they are. The American people want it. Hopefully it will.
All right, we'll continue this on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines. Our U.S. Congressman Bill Cassidy. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Sean Fagan, and Corey Ogeron, and our entire staff for letting us come into your homes for the last 10 years via Legal Lines. We hope that you've come to a greater understanding of how the law works and how the government works for you. So from all of us, thank you. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, pleased to have on the show our United States Congressman Bill Cassidy. Let's dive back in, Bill. Hopefully the Senate sends over a budget, President does, and we can see whether there's common ground. But if that doesn't happen, I assume that certain events have to take place for there to be communication. What are those kind of pressure points?
Yeah, what people are talking about now is so-called sequestration, which is an across-the-board cut to the federal government. Not everything, but many things, some of which are good, and some of which, frankly, could have a cut. And this will occur unless there are some budget that's put forward to replace them. I will point out, House Republicans have passed 2 different bills that would have replaced sequestration. The Senate has not taken up ours, and they've not passed their own. They're now speaking of something, and they want to raise taxes. Republicans are going to say, wait a second. In the last 4 years, Senate Democrats have raised taxes by $1.6 trillion. When does it stop?
And no spending cuts, as far as I understand.
There have been spending cuts, but not nearly of the type recommended to address, to match this sort of tax increase, number one. And number two, no effort to reform the things which are driving our long-term indebtedness, which are healthcare costs.
So what I'm hearing about the sequestration is that they're cutting $500 billion from defense type of laws, programs, mandates, and also $500 billion from Social Security or social networks provisions. Is that accurate?
And things over like EPA and such like that. So it's going to be both administrative cost, defense. Now that's spread over 10 years. So it's not $500 billion in 1 year, it's spread over 10.
Is it real cuts, Bill, or is it just a reduction in the growth of the monies allocated over the next 10 years?
Well, it's real cuts. Yeah, it's real
that's
cuts.
good news, because I haven't seen much of that so far. So as I understand the deadline for that event, isn't it supposed to occur in March of this year?
Yeah.
So at this point, is that going to happen?
Most likely. I can tell you what's going to happen, Locke.
Okay.
Most likely, the cuts will take place. Now, some of the cuts should not happen. They're to important programs that are important to the American people. Others are programs that probably can be cut. That said, I can promise you the government agency is going to cut those programs that the American people feel the most.
So who has the discretion to decide what's cut?
Typically, it's going to be the person that heads the department. So if it's the Environmental Protection Agency, they're not going to cut a program dedicated to implementing the president's climate change initiatives. They're going to decrease the number of inspections that must take place before someone can open a new manufacturing facility.
Wow.
I'm coming up with an example.
No, but I understand.
But just the way the game is played.
To make it more painful to the population.
They're going to make it as painful as possible, hoping that that'll apply pressure to Congress, but again, hopefully to Congress, but also the president, in order to make these cuts less drastic.
And so each of the department heads where the money is spent, they're the ones that decide what programs to cut.
Typically.
And at this point, since we have a Democratic president, a lot of, if not most of those department heads are going to be his folks, right?
Correct.
So you would anticipate that it would be applied in a way that would, I guess, promote the president's agenda.
Well, a couple things though. It was kind of amusing in the State of the Union speech where the president said he was against the sequester. But the sequester was his idea.
I'd read that.
And so he's against that which he originally proposed. And it does go after some of the things that he would rather preserve. He wants to have an EPA that can crack down on, you pick your industry, or up and down the Mississippi that we see as creating jobs, but he sees as against his way of looking at things. So the EPA will be cut. Others will be cut that he cares about. I think that's why the president, kind of late to the game, but why the president now wants to replace the sequester.
Now, I'd also heard that there were going to be really detrimental cuts to our military. Is that accurate or not?
Yeah, the military will take some cuts on top of about $500 billion in cuts they've already had. Now we know we're drawing down in Afghanistan,
Right.
so some of those savings can come along, but what I'm told the military has said is that it hurts them that some of these programs are directed. You can't cut here, you must cut there. That kind of hurts them as well.
And so is what you anticipate happening that cuts are made in a painful way to the population such that everybody yells and screams at their Congress folks, and then what happens?
Well, ideally, we come back and we more surgically remove things. This program's not working. Sure, it's got people that support it, but let's take it away. Save the money, put it back in the kitty. If we can actually go through the government and do things that make the government work better at a lower cost, that would be better. On the other hand, until push comes to shove, it's hard to get people to agree to do that.
Because what I had read was that the president was suggesting that it was better to push the cuts or postpone sequestration until in the future for economic reasons, because it represents such a huge reduction in government spending that it's going to damage our fragile economy. Is that a legitimate concern?
So the Congressional Budget Office did an analysis that's publicly available. Go to cbo.gov and you can find it. And they say that the worst thing we can do is not address our budget deficits and debt. If all we do is push it off into the future, we have fewer options in the future, but ultimately we have to pay the price. They recommend that they don't recommend, but they say that if we take the pain now, there'll be some short-term pain. On the other hand, we'll come out of it and our economy will be stronger and we'll have more options. I think that, frankly, the president wants to push it till he's out of office. Let somebody else deal with it. But as an American who has to, say, wait a second, what's good just not now for the rest of my term, but for the rest of the decade, I think it's important that we attempt to work through this.
Okay, so what I've heard and read is that this is equivalent to $1 trillion over the next 10 years, but that we actually need to cut about $4 trillion.
Yeah.
Is that accurate? Is that your understanding?
Some combination of raising revenue and decreasing spending, and it's about $4 trillion. Absolutely.
So if we've got $1 trillion cut via sequestration, and given the fiscal cliff bargain or deal that took place, we've increased taxes by, I think you indicated,
$600 million. Obamacare is about $1 trillion, and that was $600 million in the fiscal cliff deal.
So we still have $3.5 trillion to go, or
something like that.
$2.5 trillion to go?
2.5 or something like that.
And how do you see that taking place?
First, we got to recognize what is driving our long-term indebtedness. This is not a Republican or a Democrat thing. This is what others have said. It is spending on health care programs and Social Security. As baby boomers age, you mentioned in a discussion earlier, 10,000 baby boomers a day go onto Medicare or Social Security.
Let's say that again. 10,000 baby boomers a day are retiring and seeking Social Security benefits.
So we have to reform these programs to preserve them. If we do not, then those programs will not be there for when, not just the younger baby boomers, but for those who are right behind us. Those programs will not be there for us, and if you're already on those programs, your benefits will be cut. We have to reform now, and we can do it. I don't think the president's interested in it, but we can do it.
Why wouldn't we just, I mean, you hear it bantered around all the time, does just raising the age of eligibility and or doing a means test solve the problem? Let me pose that to you on the next segment. Okay. This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines, our United States Congressman Bill Cassidy. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Sean Fagan, and Corey Ogeron, and our entire staff for letting us come into your homes for the last 10 years via Legal Lines. We hope that you've come to a greater understanding of how the law works and how the government works for you. So from all of us, thank you. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, very pleased to have on the show today our United States Congressman Bill Cassidy. Bill, let's dive right back into it. We're talking about we need to get rid of $4 trillion worth of debt. It's either done by cutting spending and or raising taxes. So far, it's going to be a blend, it looks like. I asked you, why can't we, and you've indicated, and we all know that The social programs of Social Security, Medicare are the huge drivers of that debt. Just raising the eligibility age to receive those benefits and or doing a means testing, saying if you earn a certain amount of wages or you have a certain amount of assets that you get a lesser amount per some formula or you don't get any. Does that solve the problem?
First, let's kind of make clear that people know what we're talking about.
Okay.
If you are 65 and about to go on to Medicare, or 64 and about to go on Medicare, you wouldn't raise the age for somebody who's 64.
Because that would scare people to death.
And frankly, you've planned around having Medicare there when you needed it.
Right.
On the other hand, if you're 30 years old, you've got a heck of a long time to be able to figure out how to do something a little differently for an extra 1 or 2 months. And so one scenario would be if somebody was 30, they could retire at age 65 in 1 month. If they're 29, they could retire at 65 in 2 months. And you keep working it down till you've raised the age of eligibility. And that would really go a long ways towards addressing the issue. That said, you can't just stop there. These are earned entitlements. People have paid into them their whole life.
That's right.
They expect to have them, and they should have them.
This is not any kind of welfare program or whatever you want to call it. These are benefits that people have paid into their whole lives, their whole work-life histories.
Yes. But you can still do the program smarter so that the program, so it isn't just raising age of eligibility, but it is also that you have the program work smarter. And there's things that we can do with insurance programs that we know help people save money for the system, and even promote better health.
So what we're talking about is providing the same benefits, but doing it efficiently and effectively, providing quality care and benefits, but we're doing it in a way where we don't have to tax as much, right?
Well, I can promise.
When it's all said and done, we don't want to waste money, which means we don't have to tax as much.
Yeah, well, the way it's going now, taxes will continually be raised in order to continue to pay the benefits. If the trust fund's going bankrupt, you have to raise taxes to refill the trust fund. If you do it differently, then you can actually preserve those benefits and not have the need to raise the taxes. And so, and also improve outcomes. You, as a doc, I want the patient to be healthier, both in their physical health and in their financial health. There are ways to do that.
Well, let's talk about your act that you proposed, bill that you proposed. And it was to deal with that and address that via the formula that's used to compensate healthcare providers. Explain it.
Yeah, my bill called the MAC Act is regarding Medicaid. Now, Medicaid is the program that benefits senior citizens who are in nursing homes as well as the poor. The federal government puts up a certain amount, the state puts up a certain amount. As it turns out, we could do that program so much better and save money for the taxpayer. Now, I'm a doc. This morning I was at Earl K. Long Hospital doing liver biopsies, so my life for the last 20 years has been caring for these patients.
Right.
Some states just abuse the heck out of the Medicaid program. It's the federal taxpayer who pays for it. New York State has half the population of California and gets 25% more money than California.
Say that again.
New York has half the number of people as California, but gets 25% more money than California.
So how is that possible?
Because within the populations that Medicaid treats, some of the big institutions get a heck of a lot of money because it's partly paid by the feds. New York has figured out how to maximize the amount of dollars coming down to those institutions, which, surprise, surprise, are politically favored. And so we, the federal taxpayer, are paying for it. Now,
fascinating info you gave me, though, was that New York doctors are paid less.
So it isn't going to provide access to patients because they're paying physicians about 60% of what physicians get from Medicare, and only about 60% of New York doctors will take a Medicaid patient. No, it's going for institutionalized patients. One example, the Medicaid in New York is paying $5,000 a day to care for a whole series of patients. It's $1 million a year on a chronic basis.
So what did your act do to, or your bill proposed to do to deal with this?
So what our bill says, it says, okay, we're going to cap the amount of money that's going into Medicaid so the federal taxpayer knows how much money she has to pay. But what we're going to do is within each population group, children, adults, long-term care, blind and disabled, every state over 10 years will move to a mean of 100 plus or minus 10%. So if New York is getting this much right now to take care of long-term care and Louisiana is getting this much, over 10 years those differences would change so that no matter where that person lives in the United States, they would get about the same amount of federal dollars to support their health.
So wherever the service is provided, it should cost roughly the same.
Yeah, you adjust it for cost of living and such like that.
And that would save billions of dollars.
Billions. And why should a poor person in Louisiana or Mississippi or Arkansas get less federal dollars spent on their health than in New York just because New York has figured out how to game the system? It's wrong. We need to change it.
Amazing. All right, let's shift gears. And as I understand it, though, that's not being supported by the president.
No, now I'll tell you, we've got some bipartisan support.
Great, I'm glad to hear something.
And so there's some Democratic-leaning states like California that do very poorly under the current system. And so there is a bipartisan interest in what we're doing. I'm having meetings with prominent Democrats to try and promote it. That said, the president has said he's not interested in any sort of Medicaid reform.
Okay. Shift gears. Immigration, huge issue. It's all over the papers right now. You've got, sounds like the president's putting together his own plan. You've got the Senate where 8 senators are trying, both 4 Democrat, 4 Republican, getting together, trying to come up with a process. The House, I believe, is doing the same thing. What do you see happening?
Well, the 4 senators, the 8 senators, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, put forward a plan which said first you secure the border, and after you secure the border, then we can begin to talk about what we should do as a pathway to citizenship for those who are already here.
So that's the big #1 hurdle that has to be cleared for any legislation to pass Congress, and that is that our borders are secured, correct?
I will say that the president doesn't seem to be as interested in that, but it will not pass a Republican House unless the borders are secure.
Why is it required that the borders be secured? Why is that so important?
Yeah, because you want to do right by people as much as possible. The American people, we are a compassionate people. The American people are concerned for others, but they don't want to be gamed. They don't want to say, okay, we're going to try and fix a problem, but all we're doing is leaving the door open.
So we're doing it 20 years again.
Yeah, the border open, if you will, to another problem.
All right, well, let's continue this on the next group of shows, though, Bill. This is Locke Meredith, Legal Lines. Thank you for being with us today. We're going to do another show right after this, so join us on that. Thank you.